embrace it, to be quite honest with you. I enjoy the urgency that comes with what I do and what we do. I don't make excuses for failure. I own it. But I also feel like I'm capable. And so as long as I'm afforded an opportunity to do that, I will continue. But I certainly understand their frustrations, and probably more importantly than that, I share it because that's how I'm wired. And so I'm not a big-time comfort seeker, and particularly in circumstances such as this, I don't view myself as a comfort provider because there's, words are hollow, to be quite honest with you. It's about what we do and less about what we say. And so I've learned to say very little when things are going good, and I've learned to say less when they aren't.
And typically, like you would have thought he would today, he said not a whole lot. That's Mike Tomlin dissecting the 2024 Pittsburgh Steelers season as we sit here again, middle of January, after one playoff game. The Steelers are one and done. And for the 8th consecutive season, the Steelers fail to make it out of the divisional round of the playoffs. It's jacked up across the WTOV 9 YouTube channel and Facebook page. Thanks for joining us. I'm yours truly, Jack Hillgrove. We'll dive into this Steelers season a little bit. We'll pick the playoff games coming up this weekend between the Chiefs, Texans, Commanders, Lions, Eagles, Rams, Bills, and Ravens. We'll pick those games. And of course, we'll look ahead a little bit to the college football playoff national championship between the Ohio State Buckeyes and the Notre Dame Fighting Irish, led by a former Buckeye player in Marcus Freeman. It should be a good one, and we'll dive into all of that in a moment. But we begin, of course, with the Pittsburgh Steelers. They have lost another wild card playoff game. They are a first-round exit in the playoffs yet again. And you might be able to sense it by the tone in my voice that I'm obviously disappointed. I'm obviously ticked off. But the writing was on the wall for this one weeks ago. There was this sense of optimism surrounding this team heading into the postseason. And I'm not really sure why. All of the phone calls that I heard on the sports talk stations and the comments that I've seen on social media leading up to the wild card game against the Ravens were, oh, the Steelers have the Ravens number. Oh, Lamar Jackson historically doesn't play well in the playoffs. Oh, for whatever reason, John Harbaugh can't outcoach Mike Tomlin. Well, guess what? All of those arguments, playoff game aside, all of those arguments about the Steelers having the Ravens number are out the window now. Throw the playoff loss aside. The Steelers have lost to Baltimore the last 2 times, and quite frankly, the last quarter and a half that they've played against Baltimore has been completely one-sided in favor of the Ravens. If you honestly thought to yourself that the Steelers had any chance in this postseason game against Baltimore this past weekend, you didn't rationally watch this team play a football game the last 4 weeks of the season. Kirk Herbstreit, the former Buckeye and college football commentator, said it best on the Amazon Prime broadcast. There was no fight out of this team. There was all going through the motions, and there was no, I don't want to say effort, but it seemed like the will and the confidence and fight that we've seen out of the Steelers in the past was nowhere to be found inside M&T Bank Stadium over the weekend. And that's why they're first round exits. And does losing the final 4 games of the regular season have a lot to do with that? Absolutely. Absolutely it does. I think what happened, in the way that I looked at it, was you look at, we'll throw the Bengals game out for a moment because that was the peak of the snowball, and the Bengals had to win that game to maintain playoff relevance, and the Steelers' confidence was at an all-time low, losing 3 in a row leading up to that. But the 3 games that they lost leading up to that Cincinnati game were all against teams that are still in the tournament right now, that were all against teams that I think have a pretty decent shot of playing in New Orleans in the Super Bowl in a couple of weeks. And at one point, when the Steelers were 10-3, and I feel like a broken record when I say this, at one point when the Steelers were 10-3 with Russell Wilson and this offense was humming to a degree, we thought that maybe the Steelers could be one of the 8 teams remaining in the NFL postseason. We thought maybe the Steelers had a chance of making a conference championship game. And the second that they go up against teams that, again, Philly, Kansas City, Baltimore, that are all there still, we saw how it turned out. So the Steelers season ends at 10-8, first round exit in the playoffs. And the Pittsburgh Steelers are the first 10-win team. How about this stat? The first 10-win team in NFL history to lose their final 5 games of the season. It's the wrong side of history that you want to be on if you're Mike Tomlin and the Pittsburgh Steelers. And if you're a Steeler fan watching this, I have some news for you. Mike Tomlin's not going anywhere. He held his end of the season press conference today. That was the clip that you saw at the beginning of the show, talking about wearing it at this point. 8 straight years without a playoff win. Mike Tomlin is going to be the coach of this team. He also talked about today and was asked about, there's scuttlebutt, so to speak, about you potentially being a trade target, you being Mike Tomlin, about teams inquiring about your services. Now, it's been reported that Mike Tomlin has a no-trade clause in his contract as head coach of the Steelers, so he would have to be willing to move on. Mike Tomlin said short and sweet, don't waste your time. He's not going anywhere. The Pittsburgh Steelers organization, Omar Khan and obviously Art Rooney II, want Mike Tomlin to be the head coach, and Mike Tomlin wants to remain in Pittsburgh. So in 2025 and probably beyond, Mike Tomlin's the grid boss, and there are questions surrounding this team going into next season. The biggest one's at the quarterback position. Russell Wilson, in the grand scheme of things, finished his first Steelers season very average. A 6-6 record and mediocre numbers. 2,400 yards, 16 touchdowns to 5 interceptions. That's a good ratio, but his QBR is 51.4, and his QBR is bottom half of the league when it comes to that. And you go back and you look at his year in Denver last year, the numbers were kind of similar. Russ only played in 11 games, of course, because he was hurt for the first 6 games of the season, and we'll get into that aspect of the quarterback situation in a moment. But look at what Russell Wilson put on tape in 2023. By and large, the better year he had in Denver. 26 touchdowns to 8 interceptions. The ratio is what? 3-1. Well, the ratio is a little over 3-1 in 2024 with the Steelers, 16 touchdowns and 5 interceptions. And again, obviously it's scaled down because Russ played in 15 games in 23 and only 11 in 24. He averaged actually more yards per attempt than he did in 2023 by 0.5. He averaged 6.9 yards per attempt in 23 with the Broncos, 7.4 with the Steelers last year or this past season. The completion percentage was worse. Almost 3 full points worse. The passer rating was worse. And the QBR by 1/10 of a point was worse. So guess what? What you see is what you get with Russell Wilson. In 12 games, 11 regular season and 1 playoff game and a 6-6 record. That's a pretty good sample size. And if I had to take a guess, and if I was a betting man, I am a betting man, but if I don't go completely all out, I bet on games. I don't really bet on futures and things of that nature. But if I had to bet and place wager on who the Steelers starting quarterback will be week 1 in 2025, it's going to be Russell Wilson. I don't think Arthur Smith is going to be the next head coach of the Jets, despite ESPN putting that out there. I think Arthur Smith is back in 2025 as the Steelers offensive coordinator. Mike Tomlin is obviously back as the head coach and has a great relationship with Russell Wilson. At least that's what it seemed like it was this season. Russell Wilson, remember, is a investing partner in Acrisure, the company that has the naming rights to the stadium. And there's just been a full embrace on Russell Wilson's part about the city of Pittsburgh. They're comfortable. Russ is comfortable. They're going to sign him to a contract extension. And I honestly would be shocked if anybody else, and that includes Justin Fields, is the starting quarterback for the Steelers in 2025. And I bring up Justin Fields. It's what my mind says. My heart and what I want the Steelers to do is take a flyer on Justin Fields in 2025. See what you've got. The contract that Justin Fields is going to sign is not going to be what Russell Wilson signs, whether if it is with the Steelers or somewhere else. Justin Fields will sign, I would have to take a guess, somewhere between 10 and 15 million. I would be shocked if it was between $15 and $20 million contract for the next couple of years. Fields is affordable. He's younger. He's got more mobility. And I think there's more meat on that bone than there is with Russell Wilson. And you look at what Justin Fields put on tape this year, too. The numbers weren't necessarily as good as Russell Wilson's. The record was better. The completion percentage was a little bit better. But the passer rating, yards per game, all that stuff was in favor of Russell Wilson. So, while the numbers don't necessarily tell you that Justin Fields is going to be any better, there's youth there, there's more mobility there. And guess what? If you stink with Justin Fields, you might be able to convince Justin Fields to sign a one-year contract. If you stink with Justin Fields, you might put yourself in a better position to have a better draft pick or trade up for a quarterback in 2026. Because guess what? That's the way you got to go with this thing with the Steelers. Mike Tomlin was asked about that today too and threw cold water on it completely. Like, what if this organization has a setback year where they have a good draft pick and you'd be able to get a quarterback based off of the quarterbacks that are left in the tournament? And of course, Mike Tomlin said, oh, well, Jalen Hurts was a second-round pick and Lamar Jackson was the end of the first round, so I don't necessarily agree with that statement. But every other quarterback, Goff, Stafford, Mahomes, and Stroud. Goff, Stafford, and Stroud were either 1-1 or 1-2. And Mahomes, who's probably the best quarterback on the planet and could be the greatest of all time when it's all said and done, was a top 10 pick. So was Josh Allen. Forgot about him. That's the way it's got to go, folks. And for Mike Tomlin to say, well, Jalen Hurts and Lamar Jackson were guys that weren't selected near the top 10. Guess what? I'll tell you a couple of things. Number one, you were in a position, you being Mike Tomlin and the Steelers, they were in a position to draft a quarterback in that category. They did, and it didn't work out. He plays for the Philadelphia Eagles now. Kenny Pickett was selected 20th overall. Number two, the two guys that you cite, Jalen Hurts and Lamar Jackson, you passed on both of them. The Steelers selected Terrell Edmunds in the first round in 2018 while Lamar Jackson was still on the board. And in 2020, the Steelers, they didn't have a first-round pick. It was traded to Miami for Minkah Fitzpatrick, but they were on the board 49th and selected Chase Claypool while Jalen Hurts was still on the board. And mind you, there were people, and I think more people talking about Hurts than Jackson. People talking about Jalen Hurts being maybe a fit for the Steelers in the 2020 draft. So you passed on both of those guys. I don't necessarily see the argument there from Coach T. He did talk about Justin Fields and was asked about Justin Fields' body of work heading into 2025. Was it good enough to prove, you know what, maybe we could settle in next season with him as our 17-game starter? The question was asked that way. Mike Tomlin agreed with it and went into a little bit of depth on Justin Fields. Let's take a listen.
I think he took him. I thought that the way that he managed his professional circumstance was really impressive. I thought he brought an urgency to his day-to-day work regardless of his role. I thought he got continually better within our system of ball throughout the process. I thought the way he conducted himself makes that a legitimate thought or idea at this juncture.
A thought or idea at that juncture being Justin Fields being the starting quarterback for the Steelers in 2025. I truly believe their pecking order is sign Russell Wilson, sign Justin Fields, draft a quarterback. They're going to do two of those three things. I think a quarterback will be selected third, fourth round, potentially. Guys like Jackson Dart out of Ole Miss, Will Howard out of the Buckeyes, maybe a day 3 pick. Kyle McCord, former Buckeye. There are options there. I think a quarterback will be drafted, not in the top 3 rounds. But I think it's definitely on the Steelers' radar. And number 2, it's either going to be sign Wilson or sign Fields. And I think as far as their pecking order goes, signing Wilson is number 1. And if it doesn't work out with Russ, for whatever reason, they pivot to Fields. But honestly, I think Justin Fields is a week 1 starter in 2025, and I think it's with somebody else. My prediction right now is the New York Jets. Garrett Wilson's there. Decent receiving core's there. Decent O-line's there. With a new head coach, I think Justin Fields could potentially have a fountain of second chance with the Jets. I think that's where Justin Fields ends up. I don't think it's in Pittsburgh, although at this point, I wish it was. All right, before we wrap it up, let's pick some of these games. Again, Houston and Kansas City, Baltimore at Buffalo are the AFC matchups. And then the NFC matchups, you'll be able to watch them on our networks. Washington at Detroit, Saturday night, 8 o'clock on Fox 9. Again, they're scrolling at the bottom of your screen. And the Rams and the Eagles, that game at 3 o'clock Sunday on WTOV 9. We'll start in the AFC, and we'll start with the most obvious pick, I think, of the week. And that's with the Chiefs at home over the Texans. I'm not going to pick against the Chiefs until they give me a reason not to. Patrick Mahomes still has a pulse. Andy Reid still has a pulse. They're both members of the Chiefs organization, and they've won the last 2 Super Bowls. Kudos to C.J. Stroud, the former Buckeye, for winning a home playoff game and getting to this point again. I don't see it. Mahomes, again, I'm puzzled. I'm puzzled at the thought of picking the Chiefs to win the Super Bowl again for a 3rd straight year, but they haven't given me a reason not to. Give me the Chiefs over the Texans. The other AFC matchup is a little bit trickier. Baltimore played well, obviously, against the Steelers. I think that it could have been a little bit more lopsided affair with the Pittsburgh Steelers, with the Ravens. But they had 2 Buffalo. And it's getting to the point now with Josh Allen and the Bills and Sean McDermott and the Bills. If not now, whenever. When do the Bills make it happen? And I think this is the best year for them to go on the road and beat the Chiefs in the playoffs. I give them the edge here at home in a really good game, but I think the Bills get it done. NFC, let's go with Detroit and Washington. Jaden Daniels is a hell of a story. Jaden Daniels, I think, is already a top 10 franchise quarterback in the NFL after his rookie year, and he's going to make Commanders fans very, very happy for many years to come. But I just think it's a situation right now with Detroit. They are a buzzsaw. They are the NFC equivalent to the Chiefs, record-wise, dominance-wise. And the idea of a team going on the road with a rookie quarterback heading into Detroit, that franchise has the taste for the home playoff atmosphere now. It's going to be nuts in Ford Field. Give me the Jared Goff-led Lions, I think, in almost dominating fashion over Jaden Daniels and the Commanders. But again, Jaden Daniels will have Washington in football, playoff football, for years to come. And the last game, which I think potentially could be the closest one of the weekend, Rams-Eagles. I give the edge to Philadelphia because they already played a game, and if they already played a home game and they're doing it again. If it was a situation like if the Rams were going to Detroit on a off week, I might pick the Rams to potentially win that game based off of how their defense played against Minnesota alone. I mean, the thought of that Rams defense sacking a quarterback 9 times and Aaron Donald doesn't play for you. He's watching with James Conner back in, as obviously because Aaron Donald's retired. It's nuts. That defense is riding crazy momentum. Matt Stafford has been there, done that. Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp are 2 of the game's best receivers. But I think Philadelphia's offensive line is obviously a little bit better than Minnesota's. That game in Philadelphia, Saquon Barkley, an MVP candidate. I like Philadelphia to win a close game at home. over the Rams. So I think it's Eagles, Lions, Chiefs, Bills, 1 versus 2 in both conferences as far as conference championship week goes. And that is obviously next week. Speaking of championships, and this will be our last thing before we wrap it up tonight, the College Football Playoff National Championship Monday night, the Buckeyes of Ohio State and Notre Dame. I'm the same reason I'm trying to find a reason to pick against Kansas City. I can't think of a reason to pick against Ohio State in this one. 2 dominating playoff performances against Tennessee and the nation's best team in Oregon on paper, number 1. And a gutsy win against Texas. And in a way that will live on in Buckeye lore forever with the Jack Sawyer fumble, scoop, and score. They faced all the emotions. They've handled dominating teams. They've dominated against dominating teams, and they've won gutsy and close and emotional games. They've faced all that. Now, while Notre Dame has too, I think Marcus Freeman's a heck of a coach. You best believe Marcus Freeman's going to want to stick it to his old school, to his alma mater. And I think Notre Dame has the better head coach in this game. But the quarterback matchup, I think, is pretty darn close on paper between Riley Leonard and Will Howard. I would probably give the edge to Will Howard in the receiving core and the overall talent pool on offense that Ohio State has is nuts. I question whether or not Notre Dame's secondary will be able to handle Jeremiah Smith and Emeka Egbuka all at once. I question the balance of when they incorporate the guys in the passing game versus when they toss it to Henderson and Judkins in the rushing game. All of that with Chip Kelly has proven to be a lethal combination in the postseason for Ohio State. And even if Ohio State doesn't win the national championship, being able to bring Chip Kelly in as the offensive coordinator has been a slam dunk move. A slam dunk, grand slam, out of the park home run, all the cliches. But I think that it'll pay dividends, and that's why it did. It's why you go out and you spend $20 million in NIL on your roster. That's why you go out and get a former Division I head coach, a former NFL head coach, to leave a Division I school as the head coach and be your offensive coordinator. That's why you do all those things, and it's finally going to pay off for the Buckeyes. I see them winning this game by 10 points. I think it could be a 23-13, 26-16 type of game for the Buckeyes. And, you know, as dominating as Notre Dame has been in this postseason run, it's been all defense. You know, look at the box scores. Ohio State's defense is the best in the country, in addition to their offense being pretty darn good too. I think they hold Notre Dame to 13 or 16 points and win it by 10. And I think the Buckeyes and Ryan Day are your national champions when we talk next week. And if not, I'll eat crow and we'll talk about something else. But that'll do it for this edition of Jacked Up. Again, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe on the WTOV9 YouTube and Facebook pages. Follow me on Twitter at JackWTOV9. More sports talk coming your way next week. Same time, same place, 8 p.m. Tuesdays on the WTOV9 YouTube and Facebook pages. We'll talk to you then. Until then, have a good one.